Imagine your country has been under bombardment for 4 weeks. They have killed your supreme leader. They have destroyed your navy. They have destroyed your air bases. They have attacked your nuclear infrastructure. They have killed your generals. And now, they are coming for the only corridor you have left, the single point where you still hold the power to paralyze the global economy. What do? You prepare with everything you have left. That is exactly what Iran is doing right now in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. Fast boats, anti-ship missiles, anti-aircraft systems, naval mines, Revolutionary Guard units. It is the last line of defense for a regime that has lost almost all its conventional strength. And it is, paradoxically, the most dangerous one they have left. Because while the United States can destroy frigates and bases with bombers, what Iran is moving toward the strait right now is much harder to eliminate. We are talking about hundreds of small vessels, mines on the seabed, missiles hidden in trucks that move at night. And all of that sits in 39 kilometers of water through which 1/5 of the planet's oil passes. Today, I am going to explain exactly what Iran has in the Gulf, how they use it, why it is so difficult to neutralize, and what could happen if the negotiations Trump announced this week break down in the coming days. Because if that diplomatic window slams shut, the scenario that follows is the one military strategists around the world fear most. To understand what is happening in the Gulf this week, you need to understand where the war at sea currently stands. Since February 28th, when Operation Epic Fury began, the United States has concentrated on destroying Iran's conventional military capacity. And on the naval front, the results have been devastating for Tehran. In the first 48 hours, American strikes destroyed the core of the Iranian surface fleet in the ports of Bandar Abbas and Konarak. They sank the 2 Muj-class frigates, the frigate Sabalan and 2 corvettes. Practically the entire conventional Iranian navy, the one that could operate on the high seas, was eliminated in less than 2 days. But here is the problem that American military planners have been trying to solve for weeks. Iran's conventional navy was not the primary threat in the Persian Gulf. The primary threat is Iran's other naval force, the one that is not easily sunk by bombers. Iran has 2 parallel naval forces. The first is the Navy of the Islamic Republic, the conventional fleet with frigates and corvettes. That one barely exists anymore. The second is the Navy of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGCN. And that one remains alive, active, and is the one moving its pieces right now in the strait. Its doctrine is completely different from that of a conventional navy. They do not have aircraft carriers. They do not have destroyers. They have hundreds of fast attack boats. They have naval mines. They have anti-ship cruise missiles mounted on trucks that move constantly. They have maritime explosive drones. They have tunnels and armored positions on the coasts and on the islands of the strait. Their tactic is called swarm warfare, and it is exactly as difficult to fight as it sounds. If you want to truly understand this war with real data and without propaganda from either side, subscribe and turn on the bell. We explain what the mainstream media doesn't have the time to detail. We are going to do something that almost no one in the mainstream media is doing, explaining exactly what Iran has in the Gulf right now, how much is left after 4 weeks of bombardment, and why it remains so dangerous. First, the numbers we know. According to U.S. military sources cited by various media outlets, in recent weeks, the United States has destroyed or damaged more than 120 Iranian vessels belonging to the Navy and the Revolutionary Guard. That is a massive blow. But defense analysts warn that hundreds of boats remain in underground hangars along the entire Iranian coast. They are not facilities visible from the air. They are tunnels excavated into the rock of the coastal mountains with direct access to the sea, specifically designed to withstand air attacks and maintain strike capacity active. That is the first thing you need to understand. Iran has spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario, the possibility of facing the world's largest navy in its own coastal waters. Now let's go by elements, the Revolutionary Guard's fast boats. They are small vessels, between 10 and 25 meters in length, equipped with anti-ship missiles, heavy machine guns, rockets, and in some cases, torpedoes. Their speed is their main advantage. They can reach more than 60 knots, which is more than 110 kilometers per hour. Too fast for many conventional weapon systems to track easily. The swarm tactic consists of launching dozens of these boats at once against a target, from different directions in a coordinated manner. The objective is to saturate the defense systems of the enemy ship, which cannot fire at all of them at once. In the 80s, during the first tanker war, they already used this tactic effectively, and since then they have had 4 decades to perfect it. The naval mines. This is the element that most concerns American military planners. According to intelligence information published by CNN, Iran has begun to place mines in the Strait of Hormuz. Naval mines are cheap, difficult to detect, practically impossible to eliminate quickly, and can sink any vessel, including destroyers and aircraft carriers, if they explode in the right place. The additional problem: before the war, the United States had 4 specialized minesweeper ships in the Persian Gulf. Those 4 were decommissioned last year. Their planned replacements, the littoral combat ships, were in Malaysia when their position was verified. The Gulf, at this moment, has a serious shortage of capacity for detection and neutralization of mines. The anti-ship missiles on trucks. The Revolutionary Guard operates a dense network of cruise and ballistic missiles of coastal range. They are mounted on vehicles that move constantly through the road network of the Iranian coast and the islands of the strait. Locating and destroying these positions is extraordinarily difficult because they are not fixed. When American planes destroy a position, the truck has already moved elsewhere. Admiral Brad Cooper, head of the American Central Command, admitted this week that Iran's capacity to threaten navigation in the strait has been reduced, but specifically, he did not say eliminated. That distinction matters. The explosive maritime drones, a novelty of recent years that Iran has developed alongside its Houthi allies in Yemen. They are unmanned vessels, full of explosives, that steer autonomously toward a target. In recent weeks, one of these drones killed a crew member of an oil tanker and left 38 people in the water in flames in the Persian Gulf. At least 21 vessels have reported incidents of this type since the war began. The anti-aircraft systems. Here is another piece of the puzzle that changes during the negotiation pause. Iran has been moving anti-aircraft defense systems toward the Gulf coasts. This is not just to protect itself from future air attacks. It is also to protect the missile launch platforms and the boats they are deploying in the strait. If the American Apache helicopters and A-10s have to operate in an environment with significant anti-aircraft defense, their effectiveness is drastically reduced. This week, a military spokesperson for the Iranian regime made a statement that did not go unnoticed by defense analysts. He said that Iran has total and powerful control over the Persian Gulf, the territorial waters of Oman, and the Strait of Hormuz. And he added that Tehran does not need to place mines to assert its position, because it already controls the area. Is that true? Can Iran really control those waters against the world's largest navy? The honest answer is, it depends on what you mean by control. If control means that no vessel can pass without risk, the answer is yes. The data confirms it. Tanker traffic in the strait has fallen from about 100 weekly transits to only 7. More than 150 vessels remain anchored outside the strait, waiting. Ship owners and insurance companies consider the Gulf waters a maximum risk war zone. In that sense, Iran does control the strait. Not in the sense that no one can enter, but in the sense that doing so represents an unacceptable risk for most commercial operators. If control means they can prevent the American Navy from passing, the answer is no. U.S. naval forces can operate in the strait, but at a cost: attacks, casualties, damage to ships. 7 sailors have already died in attacks on vessels in the Gulf since the war began. The reality is that there is a tactical stalemate. The United States has enough power to enter and operate. Iran has enough asymmetric capacity to make doing so costly and dangerous. And that stalemate is, paradoxically, the greatest negotiating leverage Tehran has left. The Iranian Defense Council formulated it in very clear terms this week. Any attempt by the enemy to attack the coasts or islands of Iran will provoke the mining of all access routes in the Persian Gulf and its coasts with different types of naval mines, including floating mines. That is not an empty boast. It is a technically credible threat that no naval planner can ignore. What is happening now in the Gulf is not completely new. It happened before, in the 80s, and it is worth remembering because the lessons of that war are eerily relevant. Between 1984 and 1988, during the war between Iran and Iraq, there was what historians call the Tanker War. Both countries attacked each other's merchant ships to deprive them of oil revenue. Iran extended those attacks to ships from Kuwait and other Gulf countries. The situation became so dangerous that in 1987, the United States made a historic decision. It began to escort and reflag Kuwaiti ships, painting American flags on them to protect them with the U.S. Navy. The operation was called Operation Praying Mantis. In April 1988, after an Iranian mine damaged an American destroyer, the U.S. Navy destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms, sank 2 frigates, and damaged several other vessels in a few hours. At that time, Iran had a much more limited conventional navy than in 2026. And yet, that campaign of asymmetric attacks caused enormous damage to maritime traffic for years. Today, Iran has decades more experience in asymmetric naval warfare. It has drones that did not exist in the 80s. It has much more precise anti-ship cruise missiles. And it has the accumulated experience of having observed how its Houthi allies in Yemen held the American Navy and all commercial ships in the Red Sea at bay for more than 2 years. The question analysts are asking is, can what happened in the Red Sea be repeated in the Persian Gulf? A prolonged campaign of asymmetric attacks that makes normal commercial traffic practically impossible for months? The uncomfortable answer is, it is already happening. It has been happening for 4 weeks. And this week's negotiations are, in part, the recognition that no one has an easy military solution to this problem. Everything I have told you has a very concrete translation in your daily life. The International Energy Agency warned this week that the global economy faces a very, very serious threat, and compared the current crisis to the oil shocks of the 70s and the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The numbers are clear. Before the war began on February 28th, Brent oil was around $75 a barrel. This week, it reached $114. An increase of more than 50% in less than a month. Natural gas for delivery in Europe also rose sharply. Diesel futures have accumulated an increase of 76% so far this year. Gasoline futures, 70%. That is already being transferred to the pumps, to electricity bills, to the cost of freight transport, which raises the price of practically everything you buy. The South Korean president declared this week that his country must prepare for the worst-case scenario in terms of energy savings. The major air transit hubs of the Gulf, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Bahrain, have seen nearly 3 weeks of operational chaos. Airlines around the world are cutting flights and reviewing their costs. Goldman Sachs has warned that high oil prices could persist until 2027 if the conflict is prolonged. And all this is a direct consequence of what is happening in those 39 kilometers of water, of that tactical stalemate between the world's most powerful navy and the fast boats and mines of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. What happens in the Persian Gulf, we all pay for on our bills. How much has the price of fuel gone up in your country this month? Leave the data in the comments. It's interesting to see how it affects every place differently. This week, Trump announced a 5-day pause in strikes against Iranian energy infrastructure, citing conversations he described as very productive. Markets reacted with relief. Oil fell nearly 14% in minutes. But there is something fundamental that this news does not change. Iran's naval deployments in the Gulf continue. Trump's pause is about strikes on power plants. It is not a naval ceasefire. It is not an agreement for Iran to withdraw its boats from the strait, nor to dismantle its coastal missile positions. In fact, there is a very revealing detail worth highlighting. While Trump was announcing the pause and markets were rising, Israel launched a new wave of strikes against Tehran. Saudi Arabia intercepted an Iranian missile aimed at Riyadh. The United Arab Emirates activated its defenses against Iranian missiles. Bahrain and Kuwait issued missile alerts. The war has not stopped in the Gulf. It has changed temperature on one specific front for 5 days, conditioned on the success of negotiations that Iran publicly denies. An Iranian military spokesperson summarized it without ambiguity. Iran has total control over the waters of the Gulf and the Strait, and the main military advisor to the new supreme leader, Mohsen Rezai, was even clearer. The war will continue until Iran receives full compensation for the damage it has suffered. That does not sound like a regime willing to withdraw its boats from the strait in exchange for 5 days without strikes on its power plants. Which suggests that even if the negotiations prosper, the agreement process regarding the Strait of Hormuz is going to be long, complicated, and very fragile. I want to end the development with the scenario that military analysts consider the most dangerous and that no one wants to see materialize. If the 5-day pause breaks, if the negotiations fail, if Trump reactivates the threat to destroy Iranian power plants, Iran has said very clearly what it would do. The Iranian Defense Council warned it would mine all access routes in the Persian Gulf with different types of naval mines. The Speaker of the Parliament said that the energy infrastructure of all countries in the region could be destroyed irreversibly. The Revolutionary Guard threatened to attack the power plants that supply American bases and to hit the industrial and energy infrastructure where Americans have interests throughout the Gulf. What does that mean in practice? A massively mined Persian Gulf would be an unprecedented catastrophe for world maritime traffic. Mines do not distinguish between military and commercial vessels, and clearing a large minefield in complex waters can take months, even with the best specialized equipment. There is an additional problem, already mentioned. The U.S. decommissioned its 4 minesweeper ships in the Gulf last year. Their replacements were in Malaysia when their positions were verified. The American capacity to neutralize mines in the Gulf at this moment is insufficient to respond to massive mining. Iranian attacks on Gulf energy infrastructure have already affected Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates. If they intensify, the liquefied natural gas facilities in Qatar, which supply a good part of Europe, would be at risk. That would trigger the most serious energy crisis in recent decades. And on top of all this, it must be remembered that American Marines are still arriving in the region. 2 amphibious assault ships, the USS Tripoli and the USS Boxer, with more than 4,000 Marines on board, are heading to the Gulf. If negotiations fail while those Marines arrive, American commanders are going to have options on the table that they prefer not to use today. The scenario of a landing on Karg Island, the main Iranian oil terminal, would be active again, and with it, the possibility of a direct land-sea confrontation in the Persian Gulf that has no modern precedent. Let's put everything into perspective. What Iran is doing in the Gulf is not a new or improvised move. It is the application of a military doctrine they have been developing for decades specifically for this scenario. An asymmetric conflict against a superior naval power in their own coastal waters. The Iranian doctrine has a technical name, a 2/AD, which stands for Anti-Access and Area Denial. The objective is not to defeat the American Navy in conventional combat, which would be impossible. The objective is to make operating in those waters so dangerous and so costly that no adversary would want to maintain it indefinitely. And it must be recognized that, at least partially, it is working. Tanker traffic in the strait has fallen by more than 70%. The price of oil has risen by more than 50%. No ally of the United States has sent warships to the Gulf, despite pressure from Trump. The tactical stalemate I mentioned earlier has a very concrete consequence. Both sides have incentives to negotiate. The United States, because it needs to open the strait to alleviate the global energy crisis. Iran, because it cannot indefinitely withstand the weight of the bombardments. But that same stalemate makes negotiations more complicated, not easier. Each side believes that time is on its side, and neither wants to appear to be the one that yielded first. The three factors that will determine the outcome. First, whether this week's negotiations produce any concrete agreement regarding the strait, even a minimal one. A commitment to reduce incidents against commercial vessels would be the clearest sign that there is real negotiating will. Second, whether Israel decides to pause or intensify its attacks while American diplomacy tries to move forward. If Netanyahu launches a large-scale operation in the coming days, any conversation between Washington and Tehran is automatically suspended. Third, whether the economic pressure inside Iran reaches a critical point. The regime has undergone 4 weeks of bombardment. Its infrastructure is damaged. Its oil revenues are practically paralyzed. The question is how much it can endure before the internal cost of maintaining the conflict outweighs the political cost of negotiating. Do you believe Iran is going to yield in the Strait of Hormuz, or will they hold their ground? Leave me your analysis in the comments. And if you know someone who is following this war, share this video. This analysis takes hours of work and deserves to reach more people. I am going to close with a reflection that I believe summarizes what we are seeing. Iran has lost almost everything in this war in conventional terms. Its supreme leader, its admirals, its generals, and its ministers have died. Its navy, its air bases, and a large part of its nuclear program have been destroyed. The country is under constant bombardment, and yet that country still holds the power to paralyze the energy supply of the entire planet. Not because it has more power than the United States, but because the power it has left is perfectly calibrated for the only scenario that matters at this moment: the control of 39 kilometers of water. There is a lesson here about the nature of power in the 21st century that is worth thinking about. A country can lose almost all of its conventional capabilities and still maintain a top-tier geopolitical lever if it controls the right point on the map. The Strait of Hormuz is that point, and as long as that point remains in dispute, the global energy crisis will continue, oil prices will remain high, negotiations will be fragile, and the risk of a major escalation will remain on the table. What happens in the next 5 days, in those conversations that Trump says are very productive and that Iran denies even exist, will decide whether the world enters a phase of slow and difficult de-escalation or the most dangerous phase of this war. We will be here to tell you about it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And if you found this analysis useful, please share it. It is the best way for this work to reach more people. See you in the next video.